The gun did it. It's the gun's fault. Welcome to another installment of the Connecticut Gun Bench. This video is brought to you today by P.A.N. Firearms LLC. P.A.N. Firearms for your NRA certification and multifaceted firearms training. You can reach us at 203-300-6343 or visit our website at www.panfirearmsllc.com. As always, there'll be a link in the description box below. And let's talk about this. Alec Baldwin, in his first interview with George Stephanopoulos, since discharging a firearm on the set of his movie production Rust, has gone further down the road to stupidity, because you have to see this moment where he makes the claim that he did not pull the trigger on the firearm that killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins and wounded director Joel Souza.
Phones are off. Let me get slate.
Marker, good.
Great.
More, Tony?
Alec, thank you for doing this. You haven't said much in public since that tragic accident. Why speak out now?
Well, I think that there's a criminal investigation. That could be a while. There's all kinds of civil litigation. And I felt there were a number of misconceptions, most of it from sources I really wouldn't concern myself about. But a couple that I did concern myself about, where there were these authoritative statements about this is what happened. The Sheriff's Department hasn't even released a report to the DA yet. The reason I wanted to sit down with you is because I really feel like I can't wait for that process to end in February, March. I mean, I'm not asking them to speed it up for my benefit. That's ridiculous. But I am saying that they're going to do what they need to do, and I wanted to come to talk to you to say that I would go to any lengths to undo what happened. I would go to any lengths to undo what happened.
I think the big question, and the one you must have asked yourself 1,000 times, how could this have happened?
Well, there's two things I want to say about that. One is that when I talk about this, my concern is that I don't sound like I'm the victim. Because there is a victim. There's a woman who died, and my friend got shot. He's my friend. And she was a new friend. I met her and we worked together on some of the mapping out of what we're going to do on the film, which, you know, in the movie terms, if you go make a movie with Scorsese, you and the DP don't sit down and they solicit your ideas of how to make the film, you know what I mean? In the case of Helena, we sat down collaboratively and talked a lot about what we wanted to do in that a precious amount of time we had. But I want to make sure that I don't come across like I'm the victim, because we have two victims here. And the second thing is that all of what happened on that day leading up to this event was precipitated on one idea, and that is that Helena and I had something profound in common. And that is we both assumed the gun was empty, other than those, you know, dummy rounds. On the 12th, I had a safety demonstration with Hannah Reed, the armorer.
24-year-old Hannah Gutierrez Reed, seen here in photos by thedailymail.com, was hired as the film's armorer, in charge of all weapons on set. The daughter of a famous Hollywood armorer, Rust was only her second film in this role. She spoke to the Voices of the West podcast about working as lead armorer for her first film before Rust.
I was really nervous about it at first, and I almost didn't take the job because I wasn't sure if I was ready, but doing it, it went really smoothly.
We spent an hour and a half shooting the pistol, her giving me all her safety instructions.
Did you think she was up to the job?
I assumed because she was there and she was hired, she was up for the job.
And nothing she did raised any red flags with you?
No.
Okay. This training course you do, what did she tell you?
She'd say things like, remember, this is a blank round, so you have to create the discharge yourself because there's no projectile. So if you shot the gun, you go bang. When we roll the camera, you got to go bang and have the gun snap back. You have to create that. She would give you little tips about firing, and she'd say to you, when we're done, point the gun down. When we're done, you give the gun to me or to Halls, only those two people.
Dave Halls was Rust's assistant director, also known as the first AD. Seen here in this IMDb photo, he was responsible for keeping the production on schedule.
Sometimes we would be on a set that was a very, very cramped set, and they wanted people in that room on an as-needed basis. If I'm holding the gun and they say cut, I then hand the gun to Halls if she's not there.
Yeah, why Hall's not Hannah? Some people have said that only the armorer should be handling
No.
it.
That's inaccurate. Meaning in the protocols of the business, meaning Hannah would to hand me the gun 99% of the time. No, whatever, the preponderance of the time. But when we would say cut, if Hannah was away from the set, I would hand Halls the gun.
It was the 12th day of their 21-day shoot.
That day, I did exactly what I've done every day on that movie.
Baldwin was preparing for his next scene, a shootout inside this wooden church. Set the scene right before that happened. You're sitting in a pew in the church.
Right.
What's the scene supposed to be?
The scene is the two guys are there who have got me, cornered, and they think I'm shot pretty bad, and I'm kind of wilting, and they have a gun, and then the sound outside distracts them, and I then draw the gun, cross-draw out of my holster, pull the gun up like that, and start to cock the pistol, cut. I'm handed a gun, and someone declares, they said, "This is a cold gun."
Dave Halls?
The first AD. In my years on the sets of film, hot gun meant that there was a charge in there, and cold gun meant there was nothing in there. When he's saying this is a cold gun, what he's saying to everybody on the set is, you can relax. The gun is empty.
That's what cold gun means.
Well, cold gun means there's no charge in there. There could be dummy rounds.
A dummy round looks like a real bullet, but is completely inert. It contains no explosive charge. And you were rehearsing that scene. Was it an actual rehearsal? There's some disagreement about that, whether it was a formal rehearsal at that time.
This is a marking rehearsal where I'm going to show her. She's standing next to the camera. She's like this. You're me. She's got a monitor here. The camera is here filming that way. She takes a monitor that is his monitor, the operator, and turns it toward her. It swivels, and she says to me, "Hold the gun lower. Go to your right. Okay, right there. All right, do that. Now show it a little bit lower." And she's getting me to position the gun. Everything is in her direction. She's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun for this angle. And I draw the gun out, and I find a mark. I draw the gun out, I find a cut. And what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle.
So if you're shooting directly into the camera lens, you're not aiming?
I'm not shooting into the camera lens. I'm shooting just off.
Just off?
Right, in her direction. I'm holding the gun where she told me to hold it, which ended up being aimed right in below her armpit, was what I was told, I don't know. This was a completely incidental shot, an angle that may not have ended up in the film at all. But we kept doing this, and so then I said to her, "Now in this scene, I'm gonna cock the gun." And I said, "Do you wanna see that?" And she said, "Yes." So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not gonna pull the trigger. I said, "Do you see that?" She goes, "Well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that." And I cock the gun, I go, "Can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that?" And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
At the moment, the decisive
That was the moment the gun went off, yeah. That was the moment the gun went off.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
Daddy brilliant. Well, you're a sight for sore.
I ain't seen you tonight on to 5 years.
Where you been?
Drunk. You feeling frisky tonight, fellas?
Yeah!
Let's go.
You got it!
In the CNN article here, Alec Baldwin is titled Alec Baldwin, "I didn't pull the trigger on gun on Russ set." Okay. Alec Baldwin told ABC News he never pulled the trigger of the gun that shot director of photography Elena Hutchins on the set of Rust. The trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger, Baldwin said in an excerpt released Wednesday from the sit-down interview, his first since the October shooting. When asked why he pointed the gun at Hutchins and pulled the trigger when he wasn't in the script, when it wasn't part of the scene, Baldwin said, "I would never point a gun at anyone and then pull the trigger. Never." Okay. Baldwin also said he has no idea how a live bullet got into the Colt 45 revolver he used in the scene. Someone put a live bullet in the gun, a bullet that wasn't even supposed to be on the property, he said. An emotional Baldwin visibly fights back tears when talking about Hutchins. She was someone who was loved by everyone who worked with her, liked by everyone who worked with her, and admired. Baldwin said, adding, "It doesn't seem real to me." When asked by George Stephanopoulos if the shooting was the worst thing that had ever happened to him, Baldwin said, "Yes, because I think back and I think, what could I have done?" You check the firearm yourself before even using it. That's how these things start. ABC is set to air the interview Thursday night. Hutchins was killed and director Joel Souza injured in October after Baldwin discharged a weapon during a rehearsal that contained what authorities suspect was a live round. The incident, which remains under investigation, has renewed calls for better, safer practice on sets with regard to the use of weapons. Yes. First thing that should happen is every single person on set should be sat down in an auditorium and have a complete gun safety class. The comments, but Baldwin has said he believes police officers should be present on every film, TV set that uses guns, fake or otherwise, to monitor weapons safety. Well, why didn't you do that? Did you have this revelation after you killed someone? But let's start with the nuts and bolts. Yes, Alex, you pulled the trigger. There is no other way that specific type of firearm he was handling could have been discharged. This may be speculation, but even though it's in the article and we did read it, based on the time period that the movie Rust was set, for authenticity, the firearm should have been a Colt single-action 45 long Colt revolver. But let's dig deeper into that, because for the sake of context, we've got to get clarity on this. A Western-era Colt single-action, the firing pin is located on the hammer itself. One major issue with this action was if the revolver were to fall out of somebody's hands and the hammer would strike a solid surface, the revolver could discharge. This led to a practice of placing the hammer over an empty cylinder. So if you had a 6-shot, you would load only 5 rounds and then lower the hammer down on the empty cylinder. The spiked firing pin hammer was prevalent on revolvers up until about 1895 when the Ivor Johnson Company released what they called a safety revolver. This was the first time that the invention of the transfer bar was used. The transfer bar was literally a bar that sat at the back of the revolver at the action right in front of the firing pin. And it would stop the hammer from hitting the firing pin. So the only way to remove the transfer bar is to pull the trigger. The transfer bar would drop down, then the hammer would strike the firing pin. The term single action refers specifically to the function of the trigger. It has a single function, single action. It releases the hammer, which clearly means in order to fire a shot, the hammer must be manually cocked for each shot. The hammer falls forward, released by the trigger, and the firing pin attached to the hammer strikes the primer of the cartridge, which initiates the firing cycle. With these particular firearms, if you hold the trigger down and implement a technique which is called fanning, which is basically striking the hammer with your hand, the gun will continually fire. I love that scene. I love that scene. Despite it being a movie, it is a clear representation of fanning the hammer. So Baldwin's claim from a factual standpoint gets very foggy. In order for the firearm to be discharged, two things have to happen. One, the hammer must be cocked in its rearward position, and two, the trigger must be pulled. Is there a possibility that there was a malfunction, as some have claimed? There is that possibility, but then it creates another problem for Baldwin. He makes 2 points: that he did not point the firearm at anyone, yet the discharge struck 2 people, passing through one person and then clipping another. Also, he stated that he did not pull the trigger, but instead only pulled the hammer back in a cocking position. He removed his thumb and the firearm discharged. That creates doubt in his reasoning. Unless they had an actual 1800s era revolver, the possibility of the scenario of the hammer falling without the trigger being pulled and in a position for enough kinetic energy to be generated to strike the primer hard enough to set it off is basically an impossibility. Baldwin, in his interview, and Assistant Director David Hall, through his attorney, have both acquiesced to the notion that they would be surprised if there were any charges brought against them. The DA in Santa Fe has made it clear that no one at this time is immune from criminal charges. In an interview that is, and as always, I leave the links in the description box below, New York Post, Rust AD agrees. Baldwin, as the Assistant Director David Hall, Baldwin didn't pull trigger, but sheriff is not convinced. The key Rust crew member accused of handing Alec Baldwin the gun, David Hall, before cinematographer Helena Hutchins was shot dead, backed the actor's claim that he never pulled the trigger. But the Santa Fe County Sheriff has insisted guns just don't go off. They don't. Unless there is a true mechanical defect in the gun. But even then, with a single action firearm, the hammer still has to be cocked back. Make that clear. Assistant Director David Hall has always maintained that Baldwin's finger was never on the trigger guard when their cinematographer was killed October 21st on a New Mexico set. His attorney, Lisa Turacco, told ABC News. Dave has told me since the very first day I met him that Alec did not pull that trigger. Turacco insisted that in the interview on Good Morning America Thursday. The entire time Baldwin had his finger outside the trigger guard, parallel to the barrel. Hall told me since day one and that he thought it was a misfire, Turacco said. It was a pure accident, freak off accident, and unfortunately killed somebody. In a snippet of a tearful ABC interview set to air in full Thursday night, Baldwin insisted that the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull the trigger at them. Never, he told ABC News, George Stephanopoulos, breaking down as he said the death of Hutchins was the worst thing that ever happened to him. Turacco admitted it was a shocking development in the movie set tragedy, saying that even she was skeptical until she saw the teaser for Baldwin's sit down. Joe Alec said that it was just really hard to believe, she said, of her own client's repeated claim to her. However, Santa Fe County Sheriff Adam Mendoza, who is part of the investigation, said the actor's claim doesn't add up. Guns don't just go off, Mendoza told Fox News. So whatever needs to happen to manipulate the firearm, he did that, and it was in his hands. Expert told the outlet that it's not impossible for an older gun, such as a Colt 45 revolver used on set, to suffer a mechanical failure and go off, but it would be rare. In order to make it fire, you have to put your thumb up onto the hammer, cock the hammer all the way back, and then as the hammer is completely cocked back, then you pull the trigger, and then the gun fires, weapons armorer Brian W. Carpenter told Fox News. So that's very important because that gun had to have the two-step process to fire. It had to be cocked and the trigger pulled to fire. Film and prop historian Michael Corey also insisted it'd be very unusual for a gun to go off without pulling a trigger. Barring an as yet unknown mechanical failure, this weapon did not fire itself, he told the outlet. For the hammer to travel forward at all, the trigger has to be depressed. unless some major mechanical failure takes place. I'm going to go down to here where investigators have previously detailed in search warrants how Halls grabbed the gun from a cart and then yelled "cold gun" to indicate it was safe as he handed it to the low-budget Western's lead actor. The gun was fired by the actor Alec Baldwin, killing Hutchins and injuring director Joel Souza, the affidavits insisted. A later affidavit said Halls admitted he should have checked all the rounds but couldn't recall if the key safety protocol was followed that day. That's just basic 101 gun safety. You always check. You always check. Everyone takes possession of that firearm, checks. Everyone does it. Despite the affidavits based on crew interviews, Tarraco previously denied that Halls had handed the weapon to Baldwin, claims that she did not discuss in her latest interview, ABC News said. She said Halls is heartbroken, but not expecting any legal consequences, despite Santa Fe's district attorney previously warning that everyone is on the table. I will be shocked if criminal charges get filed against Mr. Halls, Tarraco said. He had no responsibility, no liability, and certainly not at the level of criminal liability, she said. Yes, he did. He had the firearm in his possession. It was his responsibility to check it. I've known Alec for several years, and I've never seen him like this, the TV veteran said on GMA. He's crushed, but he's also very, very candid, he said, of the star. To reiterate, Baldwin's claim from a factual standpoint, it gets very foggy. So in order for the firearm to discharge, two things had to have happened. One, the hammer must be cocked in its rearward position, and two, the trigger must be pulled. Is it a possibility of malfunction? Possibly. It's always possible. But his reasoning creates a doubt. In his interview, he said that he only pulled back the hammer and he did not pull the trigger. In order for that hammer to go forward, the trigger must be pulled. It has to be pulled. But to bring it into focus, it gives every indication that everyone here is deflecting blame in this issue. From the armorer, Gutierrez Reed, the assistant director, Hall, and to the producer himself, Alec Baldwin. No matter whether the firearm is defective, what one did or didn't do with the firearm prior, and who had what job on the set, an error chain was created and never broken until the end result of a tragedy. When a firearm is in your hands, you are responsible for it. If you don't know how to use it, relegate the safety to someone who does and have them check it for you. I stated in a previous video that the sudden focus shift from Baldwin to the set's armorer, Gutierrez Reed, who by most indications was in over her head in her position, gave me every impression that she is being positioned to take the fall to protect other people. But let me know what you think. Leave your comments in the comment section below. As always, any calls to violence or statements to violence will be removed. Please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you get noticed when another video goes live. And I will see you on the next one. Peace.